All right, guys, one life provided by pop culture and stuff, right? This video is dedicated to Reader 1717. She this morning put up a retro video game video, kind of talking about her love of the hobby of, video games and stuff, the collecting and stuff, acknowledged a few things and stuff. She gave me a shout out at the end, so go check her stuff out. But for me, the video games that started, I've always said growing up in the late 70s and throughout the 80s and stuff was a golden time, basically because of just everything, movies, technology, video games, everything that was around. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit here. It all started out with a pinball machine when I was 4 years old in 77, same year that Star Wars came out. And basically, there's just so much really happening that you didn't realize that there things were changing. I've always said when it comes to like pop culture and almost everyday life, you've got after Star Wars and, post Star Wars. But it started out with this pinball machine. I would get up and go through the couches and the laundry and get change. I'd get on my big wheel about twice a month, go around the neighborhood and collect bottles, glass bottles. Then I would sneak across the street because I wasn't allowed to cross that street because of all the traffic, and I would cash in my bottles, get a handful of change, maybe $2-3, and run into this store that was like right beside where I lived, and I would get knee-high, a bottle of peach knee-high. I'd get some Kiss trading cards, Superman trading cards, Wacky Pack, maybe some candy, and then I'd pull up a milk crate. And I'd climb on that milk crate, put all my stuff down, start putting my quarters in and play this game of pinball that had the rolling numbers. And then a glorious thing happened when I was 5 or 6, 78, 79. Pong had come into my house. Now, I knew what video games were. They were just, really starting out, but I'd already seen Space Invaders. And back then, that was my game. I loved Space Invaders. Whenever we were going to this certain store that had Space Invaders, I would have to play. It's probably one of the few things I actually would show my ass a little bit. And it didn't have a joystick. It had two buttons, that were maneuver you left and right. And you had that impending music, and you would have these aliens, a fleet of aliens that were wanting to touch the Earth. And if they touched the Earth, you died. And the music would pick up and go faster. It would bring tension and stuff. And you would stop strategizing and just go by pure instinct and reflex and stuff, right? And then that moved on up to Phoenix. That was just basically an updated version of Space Invaders, in my opinion. And then it happened. Galaga had come out. But in between all that, Pong had come into my house. And Pong was just basically two controllers that had a dial. They had dials on them, and it would allow you to go up and down, and you were basically playing ping pong, tennis, whatever you want to call it. Just a little square ball bouncing back and forth, making little beeping noises, and you would move up and down trying to either beat the computer or your opponent. And throughout all this, as you were growing up, video games had not become the center of the universe. It was just part of stuff that you could do. I'd also shoot pool. What had happened was that video arcades started popping out. There was a video arcade in the Richlands Mall called Black Gold, and that thing was open all the time. If you ever, and I mean ever, saw that place closed, it means it meant the end of the world. That place was always closed. There was another one in the Claypool Hill Mall, and then there was another game room that opened up in the early 80s right beside of the high school. And when I was 10 years old, my parents had split up for about a year, and one of my stepdad's friends would take me to the arcade, and I'd be playing the games. You walk into the arcade, it was sort of dark, but it was lit because there was no windows. You heard all the noises from all the video games. You heard people chattering. People would maybe walking around with, little cups with their straws sticking out. And one of the things about the arcade was the good atmosphere because everybody got along. Everybody was there just to kind of hang out. It was the place to be. You'd hear the snap and pop of the pool balls at the pool tables. Just everything. Everybody would line their quarters up across the game, take turns, watch. You got some social status there, and you knew you made it when it came to social status when you got into the office, because video arcades around here at least had stools and you could hang out. You always think that the guy working there was the luckiest guy alive because he would wear an apron with two big pockets and he'd be just be giving out coins and stuff, right? And girls hung out there, and they knew if they got in that office, they had made it. So, you had a little bit of everything. It was just awesome. And on top of all this, when I was 10 years old, the lines at the arcade would be going. I'd play Robotron. I thought Centipede was a piece of crap because it had a roller ball on it that you're, supposed to maneuver around trying to shoot the centipede in its sections. And then, my stepdad's buddy ended up becoming my buddy for decades. He showed me how to shoot pool. Now, the thing about it is that this was just part of growing up. That's why I'm showing you this stuff, right? There wasn't quite the obsession, with video games. They were hugely popular. There were movies coming out. There was a TV show on TBS that was basically a game show, pitting two people against each other with 30 minutes with a bunch of arcade games, going for the high score. But it just added to the flavor that was going on, man. I mean, you had G.I. Joe and Masters of the Universe and stuff, right? You had your music that made the soundtrack to this, man. You had these cool movies coming out. It was starting to have video rentals were just starting up to where you could get this stuff, right? And then it happened. You started out with the Ataris and the 2600s. And that's where I'm going with this and stuff, right? When this came into the house, it was just freaking amazing, as simple as it was, the Atari 2600. What I have here is an emulator. I now have 22 game systems with over 8,000 games, which is just fantastic, and I played around with it last night. Yes, that's a tag on the TV because I ended up buying this thing. I got my first flat screen. I'm slowly coming into the 21st century. But anyway, the Atari 2600 came in. I think I got one when I was about 8 years old, and I opened it up at my grandmother's house and on Christmas morning with snow, and we lived on top of a mountain. And only the rich people really had these when they came out. I hate to put it that way, And the first thing I did is I ran across our driveway, our yard, to the neighbor's house and got this bratty kid named Keith to come over and hook it up for me, because at this point, I was the professional remote control. The only time I was allowed to really touch the TV was to turn the channel. And my job was to go back and forth between 4 channels till we found something that was on. And I know they got messed with because it would end up being a 5-minute fiasco sometimes. So when this came in, it was just freaking amazing, even as simple as the games were. A little bit later, you started hearing tales about, whoops, wrong remote. You started hearing tales of upgrades, and there's supposed to be another Atari coming out, and you were just like, no way, and that ended up being the 5200. Pac-Man was cool. All of a sudden on CBS, on Saturday mornings, you had this block of cartoons of, I think it was Donkey Kong, Q*bert, I think Pac-Man was on ABC, but you had Saturday morning cartoons where they started showing these cartoons based on video games. And the Pac-Man cartoon was actually really cool, Frogger had its own cartoon. There was like a little block on CBS, and you had a few on ABC and a few other things. By the time the 7800 had come out, the way I remember it, the Nintendo had come out. That's what we have here. And the emulator that I have looks like the miniature thing, miniature one. And it just amazes me because when these came out, this was gold. What really changed the games, at least in the arcades and stuff, was the side-scrolling of Super Mario. Before that, you had things like Joust and Defender and Star Wars. To me, my favorite game was Tron. And then they came out with Tron Disc. Those two Tron games, when that first Tron game, you walked in and you saw that sky blue joystick and just the way it looked standing there, it stuck out. It looked different than anything you ever saw. Meanwhile, when you were still like over there playing pulled $1 a game and stuff like that with these games, and it was just freaking amazing to end up getting this, But I also know that we did this in moderation. That was the big difference. You had the people who were obsessed with games. Don't get me wrong. You had magazines come out like Nintendo Power and things like that. But it was in 1989 that I was walking around. I was 16. I would end up walking home on Sunday mornings after going out most nights. I had an older friend with his own apartment and stuff. But I started noticing less and less people outside. But it was still just an amazing thing because these Nintendo games would come out and you just couldn't believe what you were seeing. They were based on movies. You know, that was actually pretty cool. I mean, there was a freaking Goonie game, but Mario was king of them all. Everybody got excited when there was a Mario game. And what was really cool about the new video games that would come to the arcades is that you'd be hanging out on the block like you do with your friends and stuff as you got older and stuff. And all of a sudden, they would be like a big secret. You knew who your friend was by them letting you on a secret that there was a new game in town. And you would have them one or two games at a convenience store. I started seeing them pop up in restaurants like Pizza Hut, where you would have a tabletop. It was flat like a table, and on one end you had controllers on each end of the table. You could sit down and play this, and it was usually Galaga and Miss Pac-Man. So they were just popping up everywhere. It was just like, that's what I'm trying to tell you. It just became part of life with all this stuff. Meanwhile, you just had all this really cool stuff going on that was come out in moderation and stuff, and get this stuff. But, and after Nintendo, I was hooked. I had that for a few years, and Mario was the game. I'd love to still have those. And then the system that I don't think really got the love it should have, in my opinion, was the Super Nintendo. I had traveled, I graduated, traveled, moved around, went into the military, kind of fell out of the gaming. Started seeing the arcades kind of dry up a little bit. The pool tables were starting to disappear. And this came out, and there's a game called Killer Instinct. I bought the game Killer Instinct before I bought the Super Nintendo system. And now what you had in the arcade by this time would probably around, what year was this? 1994 maybe, I'm thinking. I don't know when this Nintendo the Super NES actually came out, but Killer Instinct, it came out, and what we had at the arcade was now in my apartment. We would have 10, 20 people on Friday nights popping up, and we would have just great, me and a guy named Gary would be the two guys to beat at Killer Instinct, and people would show up to watch us go at it. I'd be Spinal, he would be Orchid. Orchid was really tough to beat and stuff like that, but we had people showing up, and it got so competitive that one day me and Gary and a few other people were there playing, and a guy named Wes had popped up after getting his ass kicked a week before by Gary. You understand, me and Gary, each of us, we were probably $125 soaking wet. We were two little guys, I just gotten out of the military, so I was up to 135, 20 pounds of muscle on a 110 frame, not a big deal. So anyway, but he showed up and he was soaking wet. It was downpouring outside. He'd gotten straight out of his car, t-shirt, jeans, and he was just matted. And he's like, "Where's the little guy?" And he came in on a mission. He'd been practicing for a whole week. The Virtual Boys started coming out. Game Boys came out. I just see mostly kids with those. Game Boy Color came out. And then the Genesis came out, and by this time I was probably out of games, but I found out today that I knew Sonic was loved. I knew Sonic had video games. I played the game probably like 5 or 6 times back in the day. I had a girlfriend who had a little brother who had a Sega, so I just sampled a few games, and the Sega Genesis really came off to me like it was really for elementary kids with the games that I was exposed to. So now that I get to get in here and see all of the Genesis games to see what it's all about. But the love for Sonic is freaking strong, which is awesome. Sega 23X. But PlayStation, there's no PlayStation on this, but when PlayStation hit the Resident Evil game, the very first one, it had probably been out about 6 months, and I got to play it. I had a roommate whose mom worked at a store called Rose's, which is kind of like a Kmart or something like that. And she got a big discount on a PlayStation and 6 games, so he used his mother's discount. Came home with about 5 or 6 games. I really wasn't impressed with what I was seeing. And then all of a sudden we put in Resident Evil, and that first zombie dog jumped through the window and scared the crap out of us, and I was back in love. So that's, I could come up here with probably dozens and dozens and dozens of stories about things that happen in arcades like it was a Wild West. You'd have some stranger come in and beat a game or show you some secret worlds on Super Mario, and after they just would like have a big crowd around them and decimate them, they would just walk out like they were a cowboy walking out of the Wild West. So there's the mystique lost. There's a moderation of this stuff lost. There's an excitement of what's coming next lost because it was new. You never knew what was going on. You'd always hear about technology advancing, and you would hear 8-bit, 16-bit, and all this stuff coming out. But what is gained now is like a nostalgia and a whole new community and a whole new excitement over the years and stuff like that. For this stuff to last 40 years, or at least, and be around with me, it's just kind of amazing. So it's kind of cool to see it come back. All right, guys, just a few thoughts. Thanks.